A thrilling story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was delivered to a lonely doctor to pay her father's debt, but what seemed like a sentence turned into a forbidden desire. Only love, there, could be the worst prison. Above all, watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The rain poured down on Chicago with a violence that seemed personal, as if the sky had some old score to settle with the city. Sarah observed the drops running down the window of Mercy Hospital while finishing organizing the overnight medical records. It was a routine that calmed her. Each paper in the right place, each piece of information properly recorded, each life documented in tiny letters that could never capture the true weight of human suffering. At 28, she had transformed into the most requested nurse on the night shift. Not because she was the most skilled, although she was, but because she had a way of touching that calmed even the most agitated patients. Her fingers were firm without being hard. Her low voice carried a serenity that seemed to anesthetize others' anguish. What no one knew was that this calm came at a high price. Each night, upon returning to her two-room apartment in Wicker Park, Sarah fell apart like a rag doll. Her hands trembled, her chest tightened, and she spent sleepless hours staring at the ceiling, thinking about her mother who hadn't recognized her for 2 decades. The intercom rang with urgency. Sarah looked at the clock. 3:15 in the morning. Nothing good happened at this hour. She headed to the central desk where the on-duty receptionist, Megan, was nervously gesturing to the phone. "Sarah, thank you. There's an ambulance arriving now. Serious accident on Lakeshore Drive. Single victim, male, unconscious." Megan lowered her voice as if telling a secret. No documents, nothing. The motorcycle was completely destroyed, but he was too intact for someone who should be dead. Too intact? That's what the paramedic said. Serious injuries, yes, but nothing that would justify the state of the motorcycle. It seemed like he had gotten up after the accident, hurt himself afterwards, and then passed out again. Strange. Sarah nodded and headed for the emergency entrance. The rain continued relentlessly, and through the glass, she saw the red lights of the ambulance cutting through the darkness. 2 paramedics hurriedly descended, opening the rear door of the vehicle. When they removed the stretcher, Sarah felt something strange in her stomach. It wasn't nausea, nor nervousness. It was as if the air had become denser. The man on the stretcher was unconscious, but there was a presence about him that occupied more space than his body should. Tall, dark-skinned, with dark hair stuck to his forehead by rain and blood. His face had a disturbing beauty. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something magnetic in his features, as if they had been sculpted by someone who understood pain. An old scar cut across his left eyebrow, and his lips, even discolored, had a curve that suggested irony and bitterness. Injuries to the right rib cage, possible fracture in the left arm, superficial cuts all over the body, said the paramedic, while pushing the stretcher. Vital signs stable, but he's been unconscious for over an hour. Low body temperature, but we don't know if it's because of the rain or something internal. Sarah accompanied the stretcher to the emergency room, and that's when something extraordinary happened. The exact moment the doors closed behind them, the man opened his eyes. Not gradually, like someone who wakes up slowly, but all at once, as if he had never really been sleeping. His eyes were grey, not a common grey, but a shade that seemed to change intensity depending on the light, as if they were made of polished metal. And when they fixed on Sarah, she felt something she had never experienced before. It was as if he was seeing inside her, as if his eyes were capable of piercing through skin and reading every emotional scar she carried. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, but there was a hypnotic quality to it. Deep without being intimidating, rough but strangely comforting. "Mercy Hospital, Chicago. You were in a motorcycle accident." Sarah approached the stretcher, checking the equipment. "How are you feeling?" He observed her for a long moment before answering. His eyes traveled over her face with an attention that bordered on indecency, as if memorizing every detail. Sarah felt her face heat up and forced herself to maintain a professional demeanor. "I feel like I died and came back wrong." He tried to sit up, but groaned in pain and lay back down. "What's your name?" "Sarah." I'm a nurse here. Do you have any identification? Anyone we can contact? Sarah. He repeated the name as if savoring something rare. No, I don't have anyone. There was something in the way he said this that made Sarah's heart tighten. It wasn't self-pity, but a simple and devastating statement. She had heard many people say they had no one. Lonely. Patients, abandoned elderly, young people who had fought with their families, but she had never heard anyone say it with such acceptance, as if solitude were a choice and not a circumstance. What's your full name? Ethan. He closed his eyes. For a moment, as if the simple act of speaking cost an immense effort. Just Ethan. Last name? Don't have one. Sarah frowned. Everyone has a last name. I don't. He opened his eyes again and stared at her with an intensity that made her take a step back. Some people are born without roots, Sarah. Others choose to cut them. What's your story? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her story, much less a newly arrived patient. She stammered something about being there to take care of him, not the other way around, but Ethan smiled. The first smile she saw from him, which had the effect of a slap. Everyone has a story, he said, echoing her own words, including people, without last names. During the following hours, Sarah found herself gravitating around his room with a frequency that was far from professional. Ethan was a difficult patient. He refused certain medications without explanation, didn't answer medical questions in the expected way, and had a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable. All the other nurses made excuses not to enter his room. All except Sarah. She felt strangely at ease in his presence, as if she had finally found someone who spoke her language. Ethan didn't ask questions about procedures or schedules. Instead, he observed the way she moved her hands when changing bandages, how her shoulders curved when she thought no one was looking, how she bit her lower lip when concentrated. Have you ever been truly touched? The question came out of nowhere when she was checking his blood pressure on the second night. Sarah almost dropped the device. Excuse me? Truly touched, by someone who wanted more than just to be with you. That's none of your business. But her voice came out shaky, betraying her discomfort. You're right. Ethan extended his hand, the one that wasn't hurt, and lightly touched her wrist. But I need to know. The touch was like an electric shock. Sarah felt something awaken inside her, something that had been sleeping for so long that she had forgotten it existed. It was desire, yes, but it was more than that. It was recognition, as if those fingers knew her skin from other lives. Why do you need to know? She didn't pull her hand away. Because I'm very good at breaking whole things. Ethan withdrew his hand, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. And you're too whole. Sarah spent the rest of the night trying to decipher what he had meant. When the sun rose and her shift ended, she found herself reluctant to leave. There was something addictive about Ethan's presence, something that made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. On the third day, he was well enough to walk through the corridor. Sarah found him standing in front of the window overlooking the hospital's inner garden, watching the rain that continued to fall. She approached slowly, as if he were a wild animal that might flee at any sudden movement. You like the rain, she observed. Rain cleanses. He didn't turn to look at her. Washes away what shouldn't be there. And what shouldn't be where? In me. Ethan finally turned, and Sarah saw that his eyes were different, darker, more intense. Sarah, have you ever done something that you knew you'd regret before you even did it? She thought of her mother, of the visit she had planned for the weekend and would probably cancel again. She thought of the relationships she had sabotaged before they became too serious. She thought of all the times she had chosen safety over life. Always. Then you understand me. He moved closer, stopping so near that she could feel the heat from his body. I'm going to touch you truly, Sarah, and you're going to let me, and we'll both regret it. How can you be so sure? Because I've been through this before. There was something in the way he said this that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It wasn't boasting or arrogance, it was knowledge, as if he really knew how the story would end. With how many women? The question escaped before she could censor herself. Ethan smiled, but there was no humor in the smile. How many do you think can survive me? You talk as if you were dangerous. I am. The brutal honesty of the response should have frightened her. Instead, it only made her move closer. There was something broken in him that echoed something broken in her. It was as if they were two pieces of the same shattered mirror which only made sense when placed side by side. Sarah. He said her name like a prayer. You have a choice to make. What choice? You can continue caring for me as a nurse, see me get better, see me leave, and return to your life, as if I never existed. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was hoarser. Or you can let me take you with me. Where to? To the place where you stop hiding. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. She had spent her entire life hiding from her mother's pain, from the possibility of getting hurt, from the chance to really live. And here was a man offering the opposite of all that, offering danger, uncertainty, the possibility of breaking completely. And if I choose to hide? Then I leave tomorrow morning and you never see me again. And if I choose to go with you? Ethan extended his hand. Then we find out together if I can break you before you break me. Sarah looked at the extended hand. His fingers were long, with old scars on the knuckles, clean nails but irregularly cut, as if he had a habit of biting. Then, when nervous, it was a hand that had known work, violence, affection, a hand that promised things she didn't even know she wanted. She thought about her mother, institutionalized for 20 years, staring into the void as if seeing ghosts. She thought about the empty apartment that awaited her, the sleepless nights, the constant feeling of living only halfway. She thought about all the what-ifs she had collected throughout her life, stored in drawers like letters never sent, and then she extended her hand and touched his. The world exploded in colors she didn't know existed. Ethan's touch was like a memory of something she had never lived, as if his fingers knew the map of her skin by heart. He interlaced his fingers with hers, squeezing with a firmness that was both delicate and possessive. There, he said, and there was something final in that word. Now there's no going back. Sarah didn't know if he was right, but for the first time in years she didn't care about the consequences. There was something about Ethan that awakened in her a hunger she didn't even know she carried, a need to be touched, seen, consumed, a desire to finally stop being careful. What happens now? Now. Ethan pulled her hand, bringing her closer until she could feel his breath on her face. I show you what it's like to be touched by someone who isn't afraid to break you. And there, in the empty corridor of the hospital, with the rain tapping on the window and the world continuing its indifferent routine outside, Sarah understood that she had just crossed a line from which she could never return. The rest of the shift passed like a blur. Sarah moved on autopilot, administering medications, checking vital signs, making notes in medical records, but her mind was completely occupied with Ethan, with the way he had touched her hand, with the veiled promise in his eyes, with the feeling that something fundamental had changed in her life, as if she had awakened from a 28-year sleep. When the shift ended, she found herself standing outside his room, hesitating. It was Saturday morning. She had the weekend off, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what to do with this freedom. Normally, she would go home, read a book, maybe visit her mother at the sanitarium, live the kind of safe and predictable weekend that had become her trademark. But nothing about Ethan was safe or predictable. She knocked lightly on the door and entered. He was awake, sitting on the bed, looking out the window. When he saw her, he smiled, not the devastating smile from before, but something softer, almost shy. I thought you had changed your mind. I still can, but even saying this, she approached the bed. You can. Ethan turned to face her completely. Do you want to change it? Sarah looked at him, really looked. She saw the scars that mapped his body like an atlas of pain, the way he held his left shoulder as if it still hurt, the way his eyes seemed to carry more experience than one life should hold. There was something about him that frightened and attracted her in equal measure. "I don't know what I want." Lie. He extended his hand again, but this time didn't wait for her to take it. Instead, he gently touched her face, his thumb caressing her cheek. "You know exactly what you want, you're just afraid to want it." The touch was like fire. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned into his hand, allowing herself for the first time in her life to simply feel. It was as if all her senses had been amplified. She could feel the texture of his skin, the smell that was a mixture of hospital soap and something wild, could hear the sound of his breathing changing as she moved closer. "Sarah," his voice was lower, more urgent. "Look at me." She opened her eyes and found herself lost in the intense grey of his gaze. There was something hypnotic there, something that made her feel as if she were being pulled into deep waters. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, his hand still on her face. "Have you ever been truly touched?" This time she didn't hesitate. "No." The confession came out like Theo Sai, carrying years of superficial relationships, of men who had touched her body but never her soul, of a loneliness that had become as familiar as her own shadow. Something changed in Ethan's gaze. It became more intense, more possessive, as if she had just given him something he had been looking for a long time. "Then I'll be the first," he said, and there was a promise in those words that made her stomach contract with anticipation. "And when I'm done, you'll understand why. All the others were just rehearsals." He rose slowly from the bed, and Sarah realized that he was even larger than she had imagined. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that occupied the entire space of the room. When he approached her, it was as if the air had become denser. "Are you sure?" He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. In response, Sarah stood on her tiptoes and touched her lips to his. The kiss started soft, almost hesitant, as if both were testing unknown waters. But when Ethan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest, something broke between them. The kiss intensified, becoming more urgent, more desperate. It was as if they were trying to consume each other, as if a kiss could heal all the wounds they carried. Sarah felt her legs weaken and grabbed his shoulders to keep her balance. Ethan moaned softly against her lips, a sound that sent waves of heat through her body. His hands moved to her waist, moving up the side of her body with torturous slowness. "God, Sarah," he murmured against her neck, his hot breath making her tremble. "You have no idea what you do to me." She wanted to respond, but the words were lost when he found that sensitive spot just below her ear. His lips moved against her skin with a precision that suggested experience. But there was something different there, something more intense than simple technique. "Ethan," she managed to say, and the name came out like a plea. He moved away enough to look into her eyes, and what she saw there left her breathless. It was desire, yes, but it was more than that. It was adoration. It was a hunger that seemed to have roots somewhere much deeper than simple physical attraction. "Come with me," he said, his voice hoarse with promises she didn't even know she wanted to hear. And for the first time in her life, Sarah said yes without thinking about the consequences. Sarah's apartment was on the 4th floor of an old building in Wicker Park, one of those built in the 70s that had personality, but no luxury. The elevator had been broken for 3 months, and she had grown accustomed to climbing the stairs as part of her daily exercise routine. But that Saturday morning, with Ethan by her side, each step seemed to carry a symbolic weight. "Are you sure about this?" she asked for the 3rd time while searching for her keys in her purse. "Technically, you should still be in the hospital for a few more days." "Technically," Ethan repeated, leaning against the wall of the narrow hallway. "I shouldn't be alive." There was an ironic smile on his lips, but his eyes remained serious. "Besides, you're a nurse. You can take better care of me than any hospital." The way he said, "take care of me," made something contract in Sarah's lower abdomen. There were layers of meaning in those words that she was still learning to decipher. She finally found the keys and opened the door, hesitating for a moment before entering. The apartment was small but cozy, decorated with the few pieces of furniture she had managed to buy over the years. A living room that served as a bedroom, with a twin bed against the wall, a small bookshelf, a two-seater sofa she had bought used and refurbished herself. The American kitchenette was tiny, but functional. It was the kind of space that spoke of a life lived alone, without pretensions or excesses. Ethan entered slowly, his eyes scanning every detail with an attention that made her nervous. It was as if he was memorizing everything, as if he wanted to understand who she was through the objects she had chosen to surround her life. "It's small," she said, suddenly embarrassed. There was something about his presence that made the apartment seem even smaller. "It's perfect." He went to the window overlooking the street, observing the morning movement of the city. "It looks like you." "How so?" "Honest, unpretentious, more beautiful than it realizes." Sarah felt her face heat up at the compliment. She wasn't used to being seen that way, as if she was something precious. Most people saw her as competent, reliable, but never as beautiful. Ethan had a way of looking at her that made her feel as if she were being seen for the first time. "You must be hungry," she said, trying to break the tension that seemed to electrify the air between them. "I can make something to eat." "Sarah." He turned to face her, and there was something different in his look, darker, more intense. "I didn't come here because of food." The raw declaration made her heart race. She knew this, of course. She had known from the moment she had extended her hand to touch his at the hospital that she wasn't just offering to take care of his physical wounds, but hearing the words out loud made everything more real, more inevitable. "Then why did you come?" Ethan approached slowly, like a predator not wanting to scare its prey. "Because you asked me to touch you truly, and I never deny such a beautiful request." "I didn't ask for that." "Not with words." He stopped in front of her, raising his hand to touch her face. "But your eyes asked, your body asked. Every breath of yours since we met has been an invitation." His fingers traced the line of her jaw with a softness that contrasted with the intensity of his words. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, finally allowing herself to admit what she had been denying since she first saw him. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of me? Of how you make me feel." Ethan chuckled softly, a sound that reverberated in his chest. "And how do I make you feel?" Sarah opened her eyes and found herself lost in his gaze. "Like I'm waking up from a very long sleep, like I'm finally alive." "And you're afraid of that?" "I'm afraid that, after feeling this, I won't be able to go back to who I was before." "Why would you want to go back?" Ethan bent until their faces were inches apart. "The woman you were before was just surviving. I want to see who you are when you're really living." Before she could respond, he kissed her. This time there was no hesitation, no exploratory softness. It was a kiss that claimed, that possessed, that promised things she didn't even know she wanted. Sarah felt her legs weaken and grabbed his shoulders, letting him support her. Ethan's hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him until there was no space between their bodies. She could feel every muscle, every hard line of his torso, through the hospital t-shirt he still wore. She could feel his heart beating against hers, an accelerated rhythm that echoed her own agitation. "Sarah," he murmured against her lips, and there was an urgency in his voice that made something contract, deep in her belly. "I need you." The raw confession, said with a vulnerability that contrasted with his confident posture, broke her last barrier of resistance. Sarah stood on her tiptoes and deepened the kiss, her hands rising to tangle in his hair. Ethan moaned softly and pressed her against the nearest wall, his lips moving to her neck. Each touch, each caress seemed to awaken nerve endings she didn't even know she possessed. It was as if her body had been specifically created to respond to his, as if they were two parts of a whole, finally meeting. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against the skin of her neck, his hot breath making her tremble. "I can't stop looking at you since I woke up and saw you." His hands moved over her body with a reverence that bordered on adoration, as if memorizing every curve, every point where she responded to his touch. When his fingers found the hem of her blouse, he stopped and looked into her eyes. Are you... Sure? In response, Sarah pulled her own blouse over her head, letting it fall to the floor between them. The expression on Ethan's face was like an electric shock. It was pure desire, but there was something deeper there, something that bordered on reverence. "Perfect," he said, his voice hoarse with admiration. "You are absolutely perfect." His hands moved to cover her breasts over her bra, his thumbs caressing the nipples that were already hard under the fabric. Sarah arched her back, a low moan escaping her lips. She had never felt so sensitive, so connected to her own sensations. Ethan leaned down and pressed his lips against the skin of her chest, just above the neckline of her bra. His mouth was hot and wet, and the way he touched her, with hunger, but also with care, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Why are you crying?" He stopped immediately, his hands rising to dry the tears running down her face. "Because no one has ever touched me like this," she confessed, her voice broken, with emotion, as if I were something precious. Something changed in Ethan's gaze. It became darker, more possessive. "Because you are the most precious thing I have ever touched." He picked her up with an ease that surprised her, carrying her to the bed. He placed her on the mattress with a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency she could feel vibrating in every muscle of his body. "Let me take care of you," he said, his hands working on the clasp of her bra. "Let me show you how you should be touched." When the bra was removed, Ethan stopped to simply look. His eyes traveled over every inch of exposed skin with an intensity that made Sarah feel as if she were on fire. She had the impulse to cover herself, but something in his expression prevented her. "Don't hide from me," he said, as if he had read her thoughts. "Never hide from me." He leaned down and took a nipple in his mouth, his tongue circling the hardened bud in a way that made Sarah arch her back and moan loudly. Her hands grabbed the sheets, looking for something to hold on to as waves of pleasure traveled through her body. "Like that," Ethan murmured against her skin, the vibration of his voice adding another layer of sensation. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice coming out like a sigh. "Don't stop." His hands moved to the waistband of her pants, his fingers playing with the edge while his lips continued their devastating work on her breasts. Sarah felt as if she were coming undone, as if each touch was rewriting her understanding of what her own body was capable of feeling. "Sarah," Ethan moved away enough to look into her eyes, and there was something urgent in his expression. I need you to understand something." "What?" The question came out hoarse, her mind still foggy with pleasure. "After today, you'll be mine. Completely mine. There's no undoing this." There was something in the way he said this that should have frightened her. It was possessive, almost primitive, but instead of fear, she felt a wave of excitement course through her body. "And you?" she asked, her hands rising to touch his chest through his shirt. "Will you be mine?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, something vulnerable passed through his eyes before being replaced by an intensity that almost burned her. "I've been yours since the moment you touched my hand at the hospital." The confession was like a lit match thrown into gasoline. Sarah pulled his shirt over his head, eager to feel his skin against hers. When he was naked from the waist up, she couldn't help but let out a sigh of admiration. Ethan's body was a work of art, sculpted by pain and survival. Defined muscles, moved under tanned skin, and the scars that mapped his torso told stories she intuited were dark and complex. There was a tattoo on the left side of his chest, something tribal that looked ancient, almost ritualistic. "You're beautiful," she said, her hands exploring the topography of muscles and scars. Ethan laughed softly, but there was no humor in the sound. "I'm marked, broken, dangerous." "You're perfect." Something broke in his expression. Suddenly he was on top of her, kissing her with a hunger that bordered on desperation. His hands worked on her pants with an urgency that made her heart race even faster. When she was completely naked beneath him, Ethan stopped again to look, but this time there was something different in his eyes, something that seemed almost haunted. "So perfect," he murmured, as if talking to himself. Exactly as I dreamed. As you dreamed. But he didn't answer. Instead, his hands began a slow and tortuous exploration of her body, his fingers tracing paths that made her tremble and moan. When he finally touched her where she needed it most, Sarah cried out his name, her back arching off the mattress. "You like when I touch you like this?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse as his fingers continued the rhythmic movement that was driving her crazy. "Yes," she managed to say, her hands clutching his shoulders. "Please don't stop." "Never," he promised, and there was something fierce in that promise. "I'll never stop touching you." He brought her to the edge several times, always stopping before she could find relief, until she was trembling and begging. It was a sweet torture that was deconstructing her in ways she didn't even know were possible. "Ethan, please," she begged, tears running down her face again. "I need—" "What do you need?" He positioned himself over her, the weight of his body, a delicious pressure. "Tell me. I need you." It was then that it happened. At the exact moment she said the words, at the moment he positioned himself to finally join with her completely, Ethan stopped. Not gradually, but suddenly, as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes widened, and for a moment she saw something there that froze her to the bone. It was pure terror. Terror and something that looked very much like recognition. "No," he said, moving away from her as if she had caught fire. "No, no, no." "Ethan." Sarah sat up, pulling the sheet to cover her body. "What happened?" He was standing beside the bed, his hands running through his hair in a desperate gesture. His breathing was accelerated, and when he looked at her again, there was something wild in his eyes. "I can't. If I touch you truly, if I take you completely." He shook his head as if fighting against some internal force. "Everything ends." "What are you talking about?" "You don't understand." Ethan began to dress with frantic movements. "I thought it could be different with you. I thought that this time—" "This time what?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he went to her and touched her face with devastating tenderness. "Forgive me, Sarah, please forgive me." "Forgive what?" "Ethan, you're scaring me." "I can't stay. If I stay, I'll end up hurting you in a way you won't be able to recover from." "You won't hurt me. I already have." His eyes were shining with unshed tears. "And it will get worse if I don't leave now." He leaned in and kissed her one last time, a kiss that tasted of farewell and regret. When he pulled away, Sarah saw that there was something definitive in his expression. "Ethan, don't do this. Stay with me. We'll solve it together, whatever it is. There's no solving this." He headed for the door but stopped before leaving. "Sarah." "Yes?" "When you remember me, remember that I loved you. Even if it was just for a few hours, I loved you more than anything that ever existed in my life." And then he left, leaving. Only the echo of his words and the smell of his skin on the sheets. Sarah sat on the bed for a long time, trying to process what had happened. Her body still vibrated with incomplete pleasure, but it was the emotional pain that was tearing her apart. There was something in the way Ethan had spoken, as if he were protecting her from something she couldn't understand. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the street for any sign of him. But Ethan had disappeared as completely as he had appeared in her life, leaving only questions and a feeling of emptiness that seemed physical. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the spot where he had been, breathing in the scent that still lingered on the pillows, trying to understand what had gone wrong. It had been perfect. They had been perfect together. And then, at the crucial moment, something had changed. "If I take you completely, everything ends," he had said. What did that mean? And why did she have the disturbing feeling that he wasn't just talking about the two of them? When the sun rose on Sunday, Sarah finally admitted to herself that he wouldn't return. At least, not of his own will. There was something bigger happening there, something she didn't understand but was determined to discover. Because for the first time in her life, she had found someone who made her feel complete. And no matter how dangerous or impossible it might be, she wasn't willing to give up without a fight. Sunday morning dragged on with torturous slowness. Sarah tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned the apartment that was already clean, reorganized, books that were already organized, prepared a meal she couldn't eat. But nothing could get Ethan out of her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him at the moment he had pulled away. The expression of terror in his eyes, the way he had said that everything ends. There was something deeply wrong there, something that went beyond a simple case of nervousness or regret. Around noon she made a decision. If Ethan wouldn't come to her, she would go after him. She had no idea where to look, but she had to try. The alternative was to accept that he had simply disappeared from her life, and that was unacceptable. She put on comfortable clothes and went out into the streets of Wicker Park. She started with the obvious places: cafes, bars, cheap hotels in the area. She showed a photo she had taken of him sleeping in the hospital to the employees, asked if anyone had seen him. Most people shook their heads, but some seemed to hesitate, as if there was something they wanted to say, but couldn't. It was at a small cafe on Damen Avenue that she finally got a clue. The barista, a young girl with colorful hair and several piercings, looked at the photo for a long time before responding. "He was here this morning," she said, her voice low as if telling a secret. "But he was strange." Strange how? Looking over his shoulder all the time, like he was running from something, and his eyes, the girl shuddered. "I've never seen such sad eyes in my entire life." Did he say anything where he was going? Asked for directions to the bus station, said he needed to leave the city. The barista hesitated again. "Look, it might not be my business, but are you two together?" "I don't know." Because he said something strange before leaving. He said that if a woman came looking for him, and he described you perfectly, I should tell her he was trying to protect her. Protect from what? He didn't say. Just asked me to say he was trying to do the right thing for the first time in his life. Sarah felt her heart tighten at the words. There was something desperate in the message Ethan had left, something that confirmed her suspicions that he hadn't left of his own will. "Anything else?" The girl bit her lip, as if internally debating whether to continue. "He also said something about not being able to break the cycle. I don't know what it means, but it seemed important." Break the cycle. The words echoed in Sarah's mind as she walked. Back home, what cycle? And what did it have to do with her? That night, alone in the apartment that still carried traces of Ethan's presence, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would find him, no matter where he had gone. She would discover what secrets he carried, and why he was so desperate to protect her, because something told her this story was far from over. In fact, she had the disturbing feeling that it was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Ethan disappeared from Sarah's life, and she still woke up every morning expecting to find him sleeping beside her. His absence had become a physical presence, a constant weight in her chest that accompanied her with every breath. Work at the hospital continued, patients were cared for, medications administered, but it was as if she were living in a movie with the sound turned off. It was on a rainy Thursday, during a break between shifts, that she finally made the decision she had been postponing for weeks. Sitting in the cafe on the corner of the hospital, looking at the empty chair across the table where Ethan had sat only once, Sarah opened the laptop she had brought from home and typed his name into Google. Ethan. Just Ethan. The results were frustrating in their normality. Hundreds of people with that name, none that seemed to be him. She tried variations, added keywords related to motorcycle accidents, hospitals in Chicago, but nothing. It was as if he had never existed online. But Sarah had been a nurse, long, enough to know that every patient leaves a trail, even those who arrive without documents. She had access to the hospital system, knew the protocols, and more importantly, knew the right people to ask the right questions. Melissa, she approached the oldest receptionist in the hospital, a woman who had worked there for almost 30 years and knew all the secrets of the institution. "Do you remember the patient who arrived a few weeks ago? The motorcycle accident?" "Ethan," Melissa looked up from the computer screen, and Sarah noticed a strange expression quickly pass across her face. Of course I remember. Strangest case I've ever seen here. Strange how? Melissa looked around, making sure no one was listening, before leaning in closer. Sarah, I've worked here for almost 30 years. I've seen everything. But that man... She shook her head. There was something different about him. Different how? For starters, there was no record of him in any system. No SSN, no ID, no medical history. It's impossible for someone to live in the United States without leaving any trace. But he managed to. Melissa lowered her voice even further. And there's more. After he left, we had people looking for him. Sarah's heart raced. What kind of people? Men in suits said they were from a religious organization, something about special care for people with a history of trauma. But they didn't seem religious, you know. They seemed more military. What did they want? Any information about him? Where he had gone? Who he had talked to, if he had left anything behind? Melissa hesitated. They asked specifically about you. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. About me? They wanted to know about the nurse who had taken care of him. If you had talked, if he had mentioned anything about his past, if he had gotten close to you. And what did you say? The truth, that he had been treated by several nurses during his stay, that there was nothing unusual about the medical care. Melissa gently touched Sarah's arm. But they didn't believe it. They said they would continue investigating. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. There was something much bigger happening here, something that went beyond a simple, mysterious man who had entered her life. Melissa, did you keep any information about him? Anything? Officially, I can't give you anything. Melissa looked around again, then scribbled something on a piece of paper and slid it discreetly to Sarah. But I know someone who can help. Dr. Henry works in the emergency room at Northwestern Memorial. He has, let's say, unconventional methods for tracking unidentified patients. The paper contained a name and a phone number. Sarah quickly put it in her purse, thanked Melissa, and left the hospital with a sense of urgency she hadn't felt in weeks. 2 hours later, she was sitting in a cafe near Northwestern Memorial, waiting for Dr. Henry. He had agreed to meet her, but there was something cautious in his voice when she mentioned Ethan's name. When he finally arrived, a middle-aged man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, the first thing he said surprised her. "You're in love with him." It wasn't a question. Sarah tried to deny it, but the doctor shook his head. "I've seen that look before. It's the same look they all had." "They all?" Dr. Henry sighed and pulled a folder from his bag. "Sarah, what do you know about the man you knew as Ethan?" "Very little. He said he had no family, no past. He appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way." "And you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." Dr. Henry opened the folder and showed her a series of photos. They were photographs of young women, all brunettes, all with a disturbing physical resemblance to Sarah. These women have something in common besides their physical appearance. All had relationships with men who match Ethan's physical description, and all disappeared. Sarah felt her blood freeze. Disappeared how? Different ways. Some simply vanished without a trace. Others were found in a catatonic state, unable to speak or respond to any stimulus. And some... He hesitated. Some took their own lives, but left strange letters talking about dreams, about someone who visited them every night, about a presence that was consuming them from within. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked at the photos. There was something deeply disturbing about the similarity between all those women. It was as if someone had a very specific type, or as if they were looking for something particular in them. "Dr. Henry, how many cases like this have you documented?" "In the last 10 years, 17. But I suspect there are many more that haven't. Come to my attention." He leaned forward. "Sarah, there's a pattern here that goes beyond what conventional medicine can explain. I'm showing you this because I'm afraid you might be next." "The next what?" "The next woman Ethan will destroy." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say that Dr. Henry was wrong, that the man who had touched her skin with such reverence wasn't capable of harming anyone. But a part of her, a part that had been whispering doubt since he disappeared, knew there was truth in those words. Is there any connection between all these women besides physical appearance? Interestingly, yes. All had a history of family trauma. Mothers with psychological problems, absent fathers, histories of psychiatric hospitalizations. In the family. Dr. Henry observed her carefully. Do you have anything like that in your history? Sarah felt as if an icy hand had squeezed her heart. My mother. She's been institutionalized for 20 years. Since when? Since I was 8, she had a sudden psychotic episode. Stopped talking completely from one day to the next and never returned to normal. Dr. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a confirmation he didn't want to receive. Sarah, have you visited your mother recently? No, it's been a few months since I went there. It's difficult. I think you should visit her today. Why? Because I have a feeling she might have some answers you need to hear. The Santa Teresa Sanitarium was in the south side of Chicago, an old building surrounded by gardens that tried, without much success, to mask the institutional sadness of the place. Sarah made the journey by bus, looking through the foggy windows at the city passing by, trying to mentally prepare herself to see her mother. Helen Miller was 52 years old, but looked much older. 20 years of medication and isolation had transformed the woman Sarah remembered, vibrant, loving, full of life, into a pale, silent shadow. She spent her days sitting in the same chair near the window of her room, looking out at the garden with eyes that seemed to see things no one else could see. Mom? Sarah approached slowly, as she always did. It's me, Sarah. As usual, Helen didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the window, her hands resting motionless in her lap. Sarah sat in the chair beside her, observing the profile of the woman who had given her life but who had been lost when she needed her most. I met someone, Mom, a man. Sarah didn't know why she was talking about Ethan, but the words came out as if they had a will of their own. He was special, different, but he left, and now I'm discovering things about him that scare me. For a moment, she had the impression that Helen had moved slightly, but when she looked closer, her mother remained motionless. He said his name was Ethan. He had gray eyes and a way of looking at people as if he could see their souls. Sarah hesitated. Mom, have you ever met anyone like that? That's when it happened. Slowly, as if each movement cost an immense effort, Helen turned her head and looked directly at Sarah. Her eyes, which had been empty for 2 decades, were suddenly focused, alert, and filled with a terror that made Sarah's blood freeze. You found him, Helen whispered, and her voice was hoarse from disuse, but clear. He's back to finish? Sarah almost fell off the chair. It was the first time in 20 years that her mother had spoken, and her first words were about Ethan. Mom, can you hear me? Do you know who I'm talking about? Helen began to tremble, her hands clutching, the arms of the chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I tried to protect you, changed your name, changed our lives, thought that if I never spoke about him, he would never find you. Who are you talking about? Mom, please explain. It to me. He came to me when I was your age, said the same things, made the same promises. Tears began to stream down Helen's face. And I believed, God forgive me, I believed. Sarah knelt before her mother, taking her trembling hands. Mom, what man? Was it Ethan? He had many names, but always the same eyes, always the same hunger. Helen looked directly into Sarah's eyes, and there was a lucidity there that was more frightening than years of silence. Sarah, he's not human, not completely. What are you talking about? There are things in this world that exist in the shadows, that feed on love and life and light. They choose specific women, women from specific lineages, and consume them slowly. Helen squeezed her daughter's hands. Our family is cursed, Sarah. For generations, the women of our lineage have been chosen by them. This is madness, Mom. You think it's madness? Then why did you feel complete beside him? Why did each of his touches seem to awaken something you didn't even know existed? Why, when he looked at you, did you feel as if you had finally come home? Sarah felt the world tilt. Every word her mother said echoed something she had felt with Ethan, something she had tried to rationalize, but never completely explain. How do you know this? Because I felt the same thing 28 years ago. When I was pregnant with you. Helen closed her eyes as if the memory was too painful to face. He came to me, touched me the same way he touched you, and for a few months I was happier than I had ever been. And what happened? He disappeared, as he always disappears, but left something behind. Helen opened her eyes and looked at Sarah, with an intensity that made her step back. He left you. The world stopped. Sarah felt as if all the pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know she was putting together had suddenly fit into place. Are you saying that Ethan is your father? In some way, yes. Helen shook her head. But it's not that simple. They don't function like us. He is a cycle, a force that repeats itself through generations, always returning to the women of our lineage. This is impossible. You touched him, Sarah, felt the energy that emanates from him, saw how his eyes change color depending on the light, noticed how he seems to know things about you that you never told anyone. Helen leaned forward. Did all that seem normal to you? Sarah thought about all the little oddities she had noticed in Ethan but had rationalized, the way he seemed to appear and disappear without making a sound, how his eyes sometimes seemed to glow in the dark, how he knew exactly where to touch to make her feel things she had never felt before. But if he's my father, then why? She couldn't finish the question, because it doesn't work that way for them. They don't see family relationships the same way we do. For them, it's all about lineage, about continuing the cycle. Helen began to cry more intensely. Sarah, you need to understand, if you give yourself completely to him, if you let him possess you totally, you will have the same fate as me. What fate? You'll go mad, because the human mind can't process what they really are. The love you feel for him will consume you from within until there's nothing left. Sarah got up, walking to the window. Outside, the sanitarium garden seemed different, darker, as if her mother's words had changed the way she saw the world. Mum, what if I don't surrender? What if I fight? Then maybe you can break the cycle. Maybe you'll be the first in our lineage to resist. Helen hesitated. But he will return. He always returns. And each time he returns, he gets stronger, more determined. How do you know all this? Because our family has kept these secrets for generations. My grandmother told me the same story when I was your age, and her grandmother told her. Helen got up with difficulty and went to a drawer in the room. There's something I need to give you. She took out a small wooden box, kept for decades. When she opened it, Sarah saw it contained yellowed letters, old photographs, and a diary with a worn leather cover. This diary belonged to my great-grandmother. In it, she documented all our family's encounters with them, each generation of women who was chosen, each story of love and destruction. Helen handed the diary to Sarah. Read it, and then decide if you want to continue in ignorance or if you want to fight for your life. Sarah took the diary with trembling hands. The pages were as thin as tissue paper, and the ink had faded with time, but it was still legible. She opened to the first page and read, 1923, Ellen Miller. He came to me in the winter when the rains seemed endless. He said his name was Kyle, but I knew it wasn't his real name. None of them used their real names. He loved me as if the world were ending, and when he left me, I wished it had truly ended. Sarah quickly flipped through the pages, seeing entry after entry, generation after generation of women in her family, documenting encounters with men who seemed to be the same person. Different names, different eras, but always the same physical description, always the same story of intense love, followed by abandonment and madness. Mom, she said, closing the diary, how can I be sure this is real? How do I know it's not just a family legend that was passed down? Helen smiled for the first time in 20 years, but it was a sad smile full of pain. Because you're pregnant, aren't you? Sarah felt the world collapse. How did you? Because all of us got pregnant after just one encounter with them. It's part of the cycle. They leave a part of themselves to ensure the lineage continues. Helen gently touched her daughter's face. How many weeks late are you? Sarah calculated mentally and felt her blood freeze. 3 weeks. Exactly 3 weeks since Ethan had disappeared. But we didn't. He stopped before... It doesn't matter. Conception happens at the moment of the first real touch between you. When he touched your hand at the hospital, the process had already begun. That's impossible. For them, nothing is impossible. Helen returned to her chair, and Sarah saw that the effort of speaking for so long had drained her strength. Sarah, you have a choice to make. You can accept your fate, as all the women in our family did before you. Or you can fight. How? Find him before he completes the ritual, before he takes you completely, and when you find him, Helen closed her eyes. Kill him. It's the only way to break the cycle. I can't kill him. I love him. I know, and that's exactly why it's so difficult. Helen looked at Sarah once more, and there was infinite sadness in her eyes. But if you don't do it, your daughter will go through the same thing you're going through now, and her daughter after her. The cycle will never end. Sarah left the sanitarium in a state of shock. The family diary clutched to her chest as if it were a shield. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of Ethan, with the sensation of his hands on her skin, with the devastating love she still felt for him. While waiting for the bus, she opened the diary again and read the last entry, written in her mother's handwriting. 1997, Helen Miller. He returned, as I knew he would. This time he said his name was Ethan, but I recognized him by his eyes. Always the same gray eyes that promise eternity and deliver destruction. He gave me a daughter, and now I know that one day he will return. For her too. God forgive me, but I don't know how to protect her. Sarah closed the diary and looked at the dark Chicago sky. Somewhere in the city, Ethan was hiding, probably fighting against the same demons that tormented her. He had said he was trying to protect her, and now she was beginning to understand from what. But protection wasn't what she wanted. She wanted answers. She wanted the truth. And more importantly, she wanted to find a way to break a cycle that had destroyed generations of women in her family. Because now she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the child growing in her womb, for the chance of her daughter having a future, free from the curse that had haunted her lineage for more than a century. And if that meant facing Ethan, confronting the man she loved with an intensity that frightened her, then so be it. The bus arrived and Sarah boarded with a determination she hadn't felt in weeks. She had work to do, a mystery to solve, and a cycle to break. And no matter how dangerous it was, she wouldn't rest until she found Ethan and discovered the truth about what they really were. A week had passed since the revelation at the sanitarium, and Sarah couldn't stop reading the family diary. Each page revealed new horrors, new confirmations that her life had been predetermined by forces she could barely understand. She had missed work for the first time in years, claiming the flu, but in reality she was obsessed with understanding every detail of the curse she apparently carried in her blood. The positive pregnancy test was on the coffee table, next to the diary open to the page about her great-grandmother. 3 tests, actually, because she had needed multiple confirmation to accept that her mother was right. 3 weeks late, morning sickness she had attributed to stress, and now the undeniable certainty that she carried something of Ethan inside her. Something that, according to the diary, would be more than an ordinary child. The children born of these unions are always special, said an entry from 1945. They carry traits from both worlds, the human and the other. They are more intuitive, more sensitive, and inevitably become bridges for them to return in the next generation. Sarah closed the diary and stood up, walking to the window. Outside, Chicago continued its frantic and indifferent life, but she felt disconnected from all of it. It was as if she had crossed a portal into a parallel reality where monsters disguised as men had been seducing women for generations, perpetuating a cycle of love and destruction. The intercom rang, making her jump. She wasn't expecting anyone and rarely received visitors. For a moment she thought about ignoring it, but the sound repeated, more insistent. "Who is it?" Silence on the other end. Then a voice that made her heart stop. "It's me, Ethan." After a month of absence, he was there, on the other side of the door, and his voice carried an urgency she had never heard before. Sarah hesitated, remembering her mother's words about killing him, about breaking the cycle. But when she spoke, it was to press the button that opened the building's door. "Come up." She heard him climbing the stairs quickly, the steps echoing in the empty corridor. When he knocked on the door, it wasn't the gentle knock of someone asking permission to enter. It was urgent, desperate, like someone fleeing from something terrible. Sarah opened the door and almost retreated at what she saw. Ethan was there, but he wasn't the same man who had left her apartment. His face was stained with dried blood. There were fresh cuts on his hands, and his eyes, those grey eyes she had memorized, were feverish, almost wild. "My God, what happened to you?" He entered quickly, closing the door behind him and leaning against it, as if expecting someone to try to break it down. "They found me. They finally found me." "Who?" "The Order." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, leaving traces of blood. "Sarah, we need to get out of here now." "I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's happening." She crossed her arms, trying to appear braver than she felt. "Actually, I have some questions for you." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the exact moment when he noticed the changes in her. His eyes moved over her face, down to her body, and when they fixed on her still flat stomach, something changed in his expression. "No," he whispered, approaching slowly. "Please tell me it's not what I'm thinking." 3 weeks late. 3. Positive tests. Sarah raised her chin defiantly. And a very enlightening visit to my mother. If she expected him to be shocked by the revelation about Helen, she was disappointed. Instead, Ethan closed his eyes and let out a groan of pain that sounded almost animal. "She told you about what I am, about the cycle, about everything." "She told me enough." Sarah moved away when he tried to get closer. "She told me that you're my biological father, that our family has been cursed for generations, and that you're going to drive me mad just like you did to her." "I'm not your father." The declaration came with such force that she stepped back. "What?" "I'm not your father. Sarah, not in the way you're thinking." Ethan approached again, and this time she didn't move away. "It's more complicated than that." "Then explain." Ethan looked around the apartment, noticing the open diary on the table, the pregnancy tests, the disorder that reflected Sarah's mental chaos. "May I sit? It's going to be a long story." She nodded, and they sat on the sofa, but keeping distance. Ethan extended his hand as if to touch her, then withdrew it, as if remembering that he shouldn't. "A long time ago," he began, "there were certain lineages of humans that were different, more connected to what you would call supernatural. These lineages produced women with a specific energy, a light that attracted entities like me." "Entities like you?" "I don't know exactly what I am. I know I'm not human, at least not completely. I have memories that stretch back centuries, but I don't know if they're my memories or if they belong to others like me." Ethan rubbed his face with his hands. "The Order told me I'm a Nephilim, descendant of fallen angels. Others told me I'm a demon. I myself think I'm just a mistake of nature. And the Order? An ancient organization dedicated to controlling entities like me. They created me, trained me, molded me to be a weapon." His eyes darkened. "And they taught me that my nature is to destroy the women I love." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. "And you believe that?" "I did. For more than 2 centuries, I believed it was my curse, my purpose. The Order would send me to find women of specific lineages. I would genuinely fall in love with them, and then—" He couldn't finish. "And then they would go mad." "Yes, Because I possessed them completely, body, mind, soul, and the human mind can't withstand that kind of connection with something like me. Sarah thought about the pages of the diary, the stories of women in her family who had loved and lost their sanity. But you said with me it's different. It is different. Ethan finally looked into her eyes, and there was a vulnerability there she had never seen before. When I touched you for the first time, when I felt your energy, it was as if something broke inside me. For the first time in centuries, I didn't want to possess. I wanted to protect. That's why you left. That's why I ran. Because for the first time I was willing to break the Order's conditioning, to risk everything to try to be different. Ethan got up and walked to the window. But they found me, and reminded me of what happens when I disobey. Sarah saw the recent marks on his hands, the dried blood on his face. They hurt you. They punished me, and gave me an ultimatum. He turned to face her. Either I complete the ritual with you, possess you completely, and let you go mad like all the others, or they kill you and the child. Sarah's blood froze. What ritual? If I take you during the first full moon after conception, the process is completed. You become mine in the most literal sense of the word, and I absorb your life energy over the years until nothing is left. Ethan returned to the sofa but didn't sit. In exchange, I gain a few more centuries of life, and the child becomes a link to the next generation. And when is the first full moon? Tonight. The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. That's why you came back. I came back because I can't live knowing they're going to kill you. Ethan finally sat beside her, but didn't try to touch her. And because I found something in the Order's archives that changed everything. What? I discovered that the ritual isn't inevitable. There's a way to break it, to break the entire cycle. But it's dangerous, and it could kill us both. Sarah felt a spark of hope. How? If during the ritual, instead of me absorbing your energy, we unite as equals, if you consciously accept sharing your strength with me, instead of just being possessed, the ritual itself turns against the curse. Ethan looked at her intensely. But you need to understand the risk. If it goes wrong, you won't just go mad, you'll die. And if it goes right? If it goes right, we become something new, neither human nor what I am now, something in between. And the child is born free from the curse. Sarah absorbed the information, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. Why do you want to risk this? Why not just run away again? Because I love you. The confession came out simple, devastating. Not in the possessive and destructive way I've always loved other women. I love you in a way that makes me want to be better than I am. And because... He hesitated. Because what? Because you're stronger than all the others. From the first moment I felt there was something different about you. A strength that could be equal to mine instead of being consumed by it. Sarah got up and walked to the table where the pregnancy tests were. She picked one up, looking at the double line that confirmed her life had changed forever. If I agree to do this, she said without turning around, how do I know you're not just manipulating me? How do I know this isn't part of some Order plan? Because the Order wants me dead now. I broke all the rules by truly falling in love with you. Ethan approached, stopping behind her. And because if I wanted to manipulate you, I wouldn't have let you discover the truth about your family. Sarah turned to face him. You knew I would find out. I hoped you would. Because you needed to fully understand what you were risking before making this decision. There was something in the sincerity of his voice that made her believe him. Or maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, the way he was clearly fighting, against his own nature to be there with her. Ethan, she said softly, show me. Show you what? What you really are. I don't want any more mysteries, no more half-truths. If we're going to do this, I need to see everything. He hesitated. Sarah, this might scare you. I'm already afraid. Now I need the truth. Ethan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. When he opened them again, they were no longer grey. They were like liquid silver, shining with their own light. His skin began to emanate a visible heat, and Sarah could swear she saw ancient patterns moving beneath the surface, like living tattoos. But the most impressive thing was the energy emanating from him. It was like being near an electrical storm, something primitive and powerful that made every nerve ending in her body awaken. "This is it," he said, and his voice had echoes, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. "This is what I am." Instead of backing away, Sarah moved closer. She extended her hand and touched his face, feeling the supernatural heat of his skin. The moment her fingers made contact, something happened. An energy passed between them, and for an instant she could see through his eyes. She saw centuries of solitude, of women loved and lost, of a hunger that could never be satisfied. But she also saw the moment he found her in the hospital, and how something fundamental had changed. It was as if a light had been lit in a place that had been dark for a long time. "I can do this," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I can be strong enough." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I don't want our daughter to grow up with this curse." Sarah took his hands. "And I'm sure I love you enough to risk everything." Something broke in Ethan's expression. He pulled her to him and kissed her with an urgency that bordered on desperation. It was a kiss that contained centuries of hunger, but also the promise of something new, something they would build together. "Then we do this," he said against her lips. "Tonight, when the moon is full, we break this cycle once and for all." The rest of the day passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Ethan explained the details of the ritual, what she needed to do, how to channel her own energy to meet his instead of being consumed by it. It was complex and dangerous, but Sarah felt strangely calm. Perhaps it was the feeling of finally having a purpose, of not just reacting to events, but taking control of her own destiny. Or perhaps it was Ethan's presence, which even transformed into something supernatural, still made her feel as if she had finally found her place in the world. As the sun set over Chicago, they prepared. Ethan had brought specific candles, crystals he had stolen from the Order's archives, and instructions written in a language she didn't recognize but somehow could understand. "There's one thing you need to know," he said, as they organized the ritual objects in the bedroom. "If this works, if we manage to break the curse, I'll be different, less powerful, more human. Are you sure you'll still want me like that?" Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Ethan, I fell in love with you when I thought you were just a wounded man with no past. All the rest, the power, the mystery, the supernatural connection, was just a bonus. And if I'm just an ordinary man after this? Then we'll discover together what it's like to be an ordinary couple raising a not-so-ordinary daughter." He smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since he returned. "A daughter? I'm sure it's a girl, and I'm sure she'll be special, but in a good way, a way she can choose." The moon began to rise, a perfect full moon that bathed the apartment in a silver light. Sarah felt something awaken inside her, an energy that had been sleeping and now pulsed in sync with the lunar light. "It's beginning," Ethan said, and she saw that his eyes had begun to glow again. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They positioned themselves in the center of the circle they had created, facing each other. Ethan extended his hands, and when she took them, she felt his energy running through her like an electric current. "Now," he said, and his voice echoed with ancient power, "we rewrite our destiny." The ritual began, and with it, the transformation of both. Sarah felt her own energy awakening, growing, meeting Ethan's somewhere in the middle. It was like dancing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one misstep would mean falling and death. But it was also the most right thing she had ever done in her life. Because finally, after generations of women in her family who had been victims of a cycle they didn't understand, she was fighting back. And no matter what happened, she wouldn't be just another tragic story in the family diary. She would be the woman who broke the chains and freed all who came after her. The moonlight intensified, and with it, the energy flowing between them. The world around disappeared, And there was only that moment, that choice, that possibility of redemption. And at the center of it all, the love they both felt, not the destructive obsession that had characterized all the other unions, but something pure and transformative that could perhaps be strong enough to overcome centuries of curse. The energy flowing between them grew like a storm, and Sarah felt as if she were being rewritten at the molecular level. The full moon's light intensified through the window, bathing them both in a silvery luminosity that seemed to come from another world. The ritual objects around the circle began to vibrate, and she could hear a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Sarah," Ethan's voice echoed with multiple harmonies, "you need to meet me halfway. Don't let me consume you, but don't completely resist either. We need to merge as equals." She closed her eyes and concentrated on the energy she felt growing within herself. It was as if something ancient and powerful was awakening in her blood, something that had been sleeping for generations, waiting for this moment. When she opened her eyes again, she saw that her own hands were beginning to glow with a golden light. "My God," she whispered, "what's happening to me?" "You're becoming who you were always meant to be," Ethan responded, and there was reverence in his voice. "The women of your lineage weren't just victims, Sarah. You were the other halves. The Order made us forget that, conditioned us to believe that we were predators and you were prey. But the truth is that we are two parts of a whole." The revelation hit Sarah like lightning. Then why did all the others go mad? Because they didn't know how to fight. They didn't know they had their own power. Ethan's eyes shone like stars. "But you knew from the first moment. That's why you resisted my initial influence, why you could make me stop when I was about to possess you completely." The energy between them intensified even more, and Sarah felt as if she were being lifted off the ground. She looked down and saw that she was literally floating, as was Ethan. They were suspended in the center of the circle, connected by currents of energy that were visible as threads of light. It was then that they heard the sound of breaking glass. "They're here," Ethan said, and there was panic in his voice. "The Order, they must have sensed the ritual. Can we stop? If we stop now, we lose our only chance, and they'll kill us anyway." Male voices echoed from the building's hallway, followed by heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. Sarah saw the terror in Ethan's eyes and felt her own determination solidify. "Then we don't stop. No matter what happens, we don't stop." "Sarah, I said we don't stop." She squeezed his hands more tightly, and her golden energy intensified. "They may try to stop us, but they won't succeed. Not this time." The apartment door exploded, and 3 men in black entered. They wore clothes that looked military, but there were strange symbols embroidered on the fabrics, symbols that seemed to move on their own. The leader, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that didn't seem entirely human, looked at the scene in the bedroom and smiled with a cruelty that froze Sarah's blood. "Ethan, my son," he said, and his voice had echoes similar to Ethan's. "You really thought you could disobey us and escape unpunished." "I am not your son, Malphas," Ethan responded, and there was a fury in his voice that Sarah had never heard before. "You stole me centuries ago, molded me to be your instrument, but this ends today. This ends when I say it ends." Malphas made a gesture, and the other 2 men positioned themselves to attack. "And the punishment for disobedience is death." "Wait," Sarah said, and her voice carried an authority that surprised her. "Before you try to kill us, don't you want to know what we discovered?" Malphas hesitated, clearly intrigued. "What are you talking about, girl?" "About the true nature of the ritual. About what you've hidden from Ethan all these years." Sarah felt the energy within her pulsing, guiding her words. "About the fact that you knew from the beginning that he wasn't a predator." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't? Like?" Sarah smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. "Then explain why my energy is synchronizing with his instead of being consumed. Explain why I'm becoming stronger instead of weaker." She saw the exact moment when uncertainty passed through Malphas's eyes. It was a small crack, but enough. "You always knew we were 2 halves of a whole," she continued. "But if you allowed us to unite as equals, you would lose control over him. So you created this farce of predator and prey, this story of curse and destruction. Sarah, Ethan whispered. How do you know all this? Because I can feel it. When our energy connects, I can see fragments of the truth. She looked directly at Malphus. He isn't a Nephilim, isn't a demon, isn't anything you said. He's half of a soul that was divided long ago. And I'm the other. Half? The silence that followed was electric. Then Malphus began to laugh, a sound that made the windows vibrate. Very clever, little witch. But even if you've discovered part of the truth, it changes nothing. You two will die and the natural order will be restored. The natural order, a new voice echoed from the hallway, was never what you said it was. Everyone turned to see Helen Miller standing in the destroyed doorway. But it wasn't the broken and silent Helen from the sanitarium. This Helen had eyes glowing with power, and she carried a folder of ancient documents. Mom? Sarah could barely speak. How did you... I awaken completely when my daughter is in danger, Helen responded, entering the apartment, and when the cycle is finally about to be broken. Malphus backed away, and for the first time, Sarah saw fear in his eyes. Helen Miller, we thought you had been neutralized. You thought wrong. Helen opened the folder and spread ancient documents on the floor. I spent 20 years pretending to be insane, researching, discovering the truth about you and about us, and I finally found the answers. Sarah looked at the documents and saw texts in Latin, drawings that looked like astrological maps, and diagrams showing two figures uniting in an explosion of light. What are these documents? The original records of the Order's creation, Helen responded. More than 1,000 years ago, there existed a race of beings who were halves of divided souls. When they met and united, they became immensely powerful. The Order was created to prevent these unions because they feared what would happen if these beings reached their full potential. So they separated the halves, Ethan said, and there was dawning understanding in his voice. Kept some in captivity, scattered others throughout the world, and created the possession ritual to simulate the union, but in a way that strengthened the Order instead of the beings themselves. Helen looked at Sarah and Ethan, who were still suspended in the ritual circle. But if two halves meet and unite voluntarily as equals, they not only regain their original power, they become something new and more powerful. That's why you tried to prevent this from happening, Sarah said, looking at Malphus. That's why the farce of the family curse. Damn you, Malphus growled, and suddenly he no longer looked human. His skin took on a greyish coloration, and his eyes became completely black. You have no idea what you're going to unleash. Maybe not, Ethan said, and his voice was stronger now. But we know it will be better than what you created. The Mainam. Energy between Sarah and Ethan pulsed again, stronger than before. The documents scattered on the floor began to glow, as if responding to the growing power in the room. Now! Helen shouted. Finish the ritual now while I hold them. She extended her hands, and Sarah saw that her mother also had power. Golden energy streams came from Helen's fingers, creating a barrier between them and the Order members. Mom, can you do it? I've waited 20 years for this moment. I won't let anything stop you. Helen smiled, and it was the smile of the woman Sarah remembered from childhood. Break the chains, my daughter. For all of us. Sarah turned to Ethan, seeing the love and determination in his glowing eyes. Ready? For centuries. They moved closer, still suspended in the air, until their bodies touched. At the moment of contact, the world exploded in light. Sarah felt as if she were dissolving and reforming at the same time, as if every atom of her being were being rewritten. She could feel Ethan the same way, not as a separate presence, but as part of herself that had been lost and was now coming home. It was like breathing after a lifetime of holding her breath, like seeing colors she never knew existed. The memories came then. Not just hers or Ethan's, but memories of the original soul before the division. She saw an existence of power and beauty, of love that transcended anything ordinary humans could experience. She also saw the moment of forced separation, the devastating pain of division, and centuries of unconscious searching for each other. "I remember," she whispered against his lips. "I remember us." "I do too," he responded, and there were tears in his eyes. "Oh, Sarah, how could we forget?" The fusion intensified, and with it came a physical transformation. Sarah felt her body changing, becoming stronger, more resilient. She could feel the baby inside her also changing, evolving into something that would be perfectly balanced between the two worlds. Behind them, the battle between Helen and the Order intensified. Sarah could hear shouts of anger and frustration, explosions of energy, but she was too lost in the union with Ethan to care. "It's almost finished," Ethan said, and his voice now echoed in perfect harmony with hers. "Can you feel it?" "Yes." She could feel the final moment approaching, the point where they would become something completely new. "No matter what happens after this, I love you. I love you beyond time, beyond death, beyond anything they might try to put between us." The climax came like a wave of pure light that swept everything around them. Sarah felt herself explode into 1,000 fragments of energy, then recompose in a completely new form. When the light finally diminished, she and Ethan were standing in the center of the circle, but they were no longer the same people who had begun the ritual. They glowed with a soft and constant light, and Sarah could feel that every cell in her body vibrated with a power that was previously unimaginable. But it was a balanced power, controlled, directed toward creation and not destruction. "Impossible," she heard Malphas say, and there was terror in his voice. "You cannot have succeeded." Sarah turned to face the Order members and saw that they were backing away. Helen was standing by the door, exhausted but smiling. On the floor, the ancient documents had turned to ashes, as if their function had been fulfilled. "We did," Sarah said, and her voice carried echoes of ancient power. "And now you're going to leave us in peace." "Never," Malphas growled. "You are an abomination, a threat to the natural order." "We are what nature always intended us to be," Ethan responded, taking a step forward. "And you are the true parasites." He extended his hand, and a wave of pure energy projected toward the Order members. It wasn't destructive. Sarah could feel that he was being careful not to kill them. Instead, the energy enveloped them like chains of light, immobilizing them. "We'll leave," Ethan said with absolute authority, "and never again try to interfere in our life or in the lives of other divided souls that still exist out there." "This isn't over," Malphas said, but there was defeat in his voice. "Others will come." "And we'll be ready for them," Sarah responded. "Because now we know who we really are." The energy binding the Order members intensified, and suddenly they simply disappeared, not in an explosion or a cloud of smoke, but as if they had never been there. "Was that it?" Sarah asked, still hardly believing it was over. "For now," Helen answered, approaching them. "They'll return eventually, but not in the same form. You've changed the rules of the game." Sarah turned to her mother, seeing that Helen had also changed. She didn't glow like they did, but there was a strength in her that wasn't there before, a lucidity and vitality that had disappeared 20 years ago. "Mum, are you okay?" "I'm more than okay, I'm free." Helen smiled and touched her daughter's face. Spending 20 years pretending to be insane to escape the Order's attention was difficult, but it was worth it to see this moment. "You were pretending to be insane. All this time?" "After I discovered the truth about our family, about what really happened to me and Ethan, I knew I had to hide. The Order was watching me, waiting for you to grow up." Helen looked at Ethan. "I needed to protect my daughter until she was strong enough to fight." Ethan approached Helen, and Sarah saw something pass between them, an understanding, perhaps even forgiveness. "Thank you," he said simply, "for protecting her, for giving me the chance to be better than I was." "You were always better than you thought," Helen responded. "You just needed to find your other half to remember." Sarah looked around the apartment, seeing the wreckage of the battle, the vestiges of the ritual, the ashes of the ancient documents. "And now? What do we do now?" "Now," Ethan said, pulling her to him, "we live." For the first time in centuries, I can really live. And our daughter will grow up knowing the truth from the beginning. She'll know that she's powerful, that she has choices, that she can use her gifts to help other people like... Thus, Ethan placed his hand on Sarah's still flat stomach. And when she grows up, if there are other divided souls out there, she'll help them find each other. 3 months later, Sarah was sitting in the garden of the house they had bought, in the northern part of Chicago. It was a simple house, but with a large yard where Helen had planted a garden that flourished with a vitality that defied the seasons. Her belly now showed clear signs of pregnancy, and she could feel her daughter moving inside her. Movements that sometimes seemed to pulse with their own energy. The doctor had been perplexed by the tests, which showed a perfectly healthy baby, but with some genetic markers he couldn't explain. "She's going to be special," Ethan said, sitting beside her on the bench they had placed under the apple tree. "I can feel it." "It will be her choice how to use that specialness," Sarah responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "Unlike us." "Unlike us," he agreed. Ethan had changed since the ritual. He still had power, still had a presence that made people look twice, but there was a serenity in him that didn't exist before. It was as if he had finally found peace. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she sometimes did. "None," he responded without hesitation. "And you?" "How could I regret this?" Sarah looked at the house where Helen was preparing dinner, at the garden that flourished around them, at the man beside her who had become her soulmate in the most literal sense possible. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete." "Not for long," Ethan said with a smile. "In a few months, we'll have a small person demanding our complete attention. A very powerful small person. The most powerful," he agreed, kissing her forehead, "because she'll grow up loved and free." That night, lying in the bed they had shared for 3 months, a bed where they could finally love each other completely without fear or restrictions, Sarah thought about all the women in her family who had loved and lost their sanity. She thought about her great-grandmother Ellen, about all the others whose stories were documented in the diary she now kept in a locked drawer. "Do you think they know?" she asked softly. "The other women in our family. Do you think they know we succeeded?" "I'm sure they know," Ethan responded, pulling her closer. "And I'm sure they're at peace now." A few days later, they received an unexpected visit, a fragile-looking young woman with large dark eyes and a look that Sarah immediately recognized. It was the look of someone who had found something inexplicable and was looking for answers. "My name is Claire," she said when Sarah opened the door, "and I think I need your help." "Come in," Sarah said without hesitation. "Let's talk." As Claire told her story, about a mysterious man who had appeared in her life, about strange dreams and an attraction that defied explanation, Sarah and Ethan exchanged glances. They weren't the only ones. There were others like them out there, other divided souls who were finding each other. "Will you help me find him?" Claire asked, and there was hope in her voice. "We will," Sarah promised. "And we'll teach you to protect yourselves from the Order, in case there are still active cells." "Thank you," Claire said, and began to cry. "I thought I was going crazy." "You're not crazy," Ethan said gently. "You're just awakening to who you really are." After Claire left with instructions on how to protect herself and a promise that they would help her find her other half, Sarah turned to Ethan. "So, is that what we're going to do? Help others like us?" "If you want. We're not obligated to anything." "I want to," she said without hesitation. "I want our daughter to grow up knowing that her parents used their gifts to help other people find true love." "Then that's what we'll do." 6 months later, when Luna Miller James, yes, they had decided to give her both their last names, was born, the world seemed to shine a little brighter. She had Ethan's eyes and Sarah's smile, but there was something about her that was completely her own. A light, a strength, a promise of good things to come. The day they brought Luna home, Helen was waiting with a gift. It was a new diary, bound in red leather with blank pages waiting to be filled. "To start a new story," she explained. "No longer of curse and destruction, but of love and renewal. Sarah took the diary and held it against her chest, next to her daughter. For all the women who will come after me. For all the souls that still need to find each other, Ethan added. And that night, with Luna sleeping between them, Sarah wrote the first entry in the new family diary. 2025, Sarah. Miller James. He came to me during a storm and I thought he was just a broken man. But I discovered that we were two halves of an ancient soul, separated by fear and united by love. We broke the cycle. We chose love over destruction, union over possession, hope over hopelessness. Our daughter Luna was born free, and she will be the first of a new lineage, not of victims but of powerful women who choose their own destiny. The cycle doesn't end here, it just transforms into something beautiful. When she finished writing, Sarah looked at Ethan, who was watching Luna sleep with an expression of absolute wonder. "Any regrets?" she asked one more time. "Only that. It took so long to find you," he responded, kissing her forehead. "But perhaps we needed all those centuries to be ready for this. For true love. For love that heals instead of destroys. For love that liberates instead of possesses." Ethan gently touched his sleeping daughter's face. "For love that breaks curses." And there, in the sacred silence of the night, with their daughter between them and the future stretching out like an illuminated road, Sarah knew that she had found not only her place in the world, but her purpose. They would be the guardians of a new era, where true love would always be stronger than any force that tried to destroy it. The cycle had been broken, and in its place, a new story had begun.